not exactly a secret that I have never been a massive Illumination fan, but I have gotten softer on them lately, mostly because there are more important things in the world to be mad at, even if Illumination is the result of some of those things. But also because recently I have been enjoying a number of Illumination films, at least more than usual. Mario was not a masterpiece, but it was solid. I did like Migration, and even as someone who's never been partial to Despicable Me franchise, Minions 2 was legitimately good. So I was prepared to give up on any examination of narrative standards and just focus on the funny gags and pleasing animation. And then Despicable Me 4 made all those old anti-Illumination tirades come up again. Not because it's anywhere close to being worst film of the year territory. It does have its funny gags and moments, because everything has moments, but not enough to overcome the immense feeling of boredom that crept in during this film that I haven't felt since Secret Life of Pets 2. And I amount this mostly to Despicable Me 4 being a movie where both too much happens and nothing happens. And by that I mean there is a weirdly large amount of character subplots to touch on, while virtually nothing happens in any of them. Starting with Gru taking on one of his former classmates who vows revenge and breaks out, so his family has to go into witness protection. So for at least the first half an hour, though longer, is just them adjusting to their new lives, and almost everybody has their own scene that will not have anything of considerable narrative consequence in the final act. They are literally just scenes that happen to happen, mostly. There's Gru trying to bond with his son, while also trying to bond with the neighbors, eventually getting blackmailed by the neighbor's daughter. There's Margot at school, there's Agnes and Edith at karate class, there's Lucy as a hairdresser, while also cutting back to the original villain, and we also have the Minions at the AVL and the Mega Minions. That is a lot of subplots that I can barely call subplots. And only one of those various subplots is actual plot that actually has consequences in terms of what's going to happen in the finale, or two of them are, giving the impression that the plot is barely ever moving. This was a watch-checking film. And believe it or not, I have adjusted to Illumination's fun first strategy, which I have no problems with as long as it actually delivers fun. The problem is that there was plenty of amusing standalone clips, but very few of those clips were amusing enough to justify the percentage of total screen time they were utilizing. And otherwise, I wouldn't be surprised. Illumination scripts have never drastically impressed me. It's just that I thought they were starting to get better at this. Like I said, I liked Migration, and Migration was written by this movie's writer, Mike White, the guy who wrote School of Rock. But then again, he also wrote, the Emoji Movie, and I gotta be honest, Emoji Movie was more narratively compelling than this. And then the other writer was an Illumination regular who I guess is largely responsible for a lot of my complaints. But Migration ultimately worked because even though it was also a way less plot-driven and a more gag-oriented script, there was only one plot. That we were following only one story, not cutting back and forth between 7. But the truth is, the one aspect of this movie that actually got my brain turning was that before it, there was an interview with the film's director that talked about how the girls were never gonna grow up, that their ages would be frozen in time like The Simpsons. Which I found incredibly disappointing because, believe it or not, one of the first things I ever thought when I saw the first Despicable Me, especially when it came to Edith, who had some of the more rebellious tendencies, what would happen if she decided she wanted to become a supervillain, and how would Gru react to that? But more importantly, you know why The Simpsons kids work? Because they are just as much funny characters as the adults are. The Despicable kids are not the Simpson kids. They are nowhere close. They are just not interesting, or rather, they potentially could be interesting if you gave them anything interesting to do, and they just historically have not. Their subplots in both of the former movies I just considered complete washes. It really just feels like the movie goes back to these characters to pretty much remind the audience that they exist because Family Man is the main crux of Gru's new identity now. Now, okay, that is of course a very subjective judgment. For all I know, the Despicable Me fans love these girls for some reason. And I do genuinely get trying to keep the script loose so that the animators can have as much fun as they want. But that's the question. Are the animators having fun with these characters? I mean, I don't want to presume, but it doesn't seem like it. Is Agnes's cute factor really just that important to the franchise's identity? Somehow in a way where the Minions don't already qualify for that? And this was on my mind because I know that when I talked about Minions 2 last year, one of the reasons why I thought that it worked was because the girls weren't there. We didn't have to waste time cutting back to them or need to amend the story to accommodate their existence. And even as I say this, keep in mind that even though this is the train of thought I'm sticking with, no, I am not saying that the girls are the reason why this movie is underwhelming. Way more blame should be put on the pacing, the weak premise, and the villain being particularly boring. In fact, Agnes and Edith have a pretty fun scene in Karate, but again, that scene didn't really go anywhere, and was it worth it for the drag of the plot's momentum to put it there? And that's not even accounting for the superfluous goat scene and the minute of Lucy hating the name Blanche. Just all seemed like, wow, we could have used that time to do literally anything else. And believe me, you guys know that I am not one to tell a movie to just throw away their female characters. I prefer them to utilize their female characters to actually do something compelling and interesting. And these characters just haven't been since the movies where they were properly introduced. They could be interesting, they just haven't been. Either because the writer or the directors are not particularly incentivized or have any ideas of what to do with them. And then suddenly this movie drops and the reception is pretty middling, and then shock of all shocks, the same director then suddenly walks back the statements of the previous claims, saying that they are at least open to the idea of aging up the kids in the future. Again, open to, not saying they will, but that's something. And yeah, by the way, looking forward to all the comments telling me about the second interview, because they didn't trust that I was going to get to it, which actually is understandable. I've made some research flubs in the past. Inside Out 2 and Elio had their dates switched. No, they didn't. I got that wrong. In fact, the director's statements actually specified the possibility of Gru Jr. and Edith potentially becoming villains. Maybe because realizing that sure, narrative continuity might be annoying to deal with, but at the same time isn't needing to reset everything to a status quo also a narrative restriction? And then considering pretty much what they do in this movie is instead of with his own daughter, instead Gru reluctantly takes on a villainous protege under the threat of blackmail. And it is easily the most interesting part of the film. I actually really like Poppy, or at least I eventually did. I really liked her story because things actually happened in her subplot. But I also understand why they didn't do that. Sure, Gru has the excuse to do so under the threat of blackmail, but he would be a bad influence if he encouraged his own kid toward any villainous tendencies. Sure, Edith herself may not be above some form of blackmail, but that would show a child effectively blackmailing her own parent. Something tells me the parents would not be a fan of a movie encouraging that. But still, it is heavily irksome that Gru seems to now have this closer bond with Poppy than he does with his own kids. Except, of course, the baby that he was bonded with, having inherited his despicable tendencies, but is another reason why the movie just isn't hitting the way that some of the others are. Because the other reason why Minions 2 really worked is because of his emotional arc with Wild Knuckles really landed. And that honestly is what worked about the first movie, is that he always has an emotional arc with another character, though I don't know how many people really cared about his brother. But this time it was trying to bond with his baby, and that just didn't hit, because it was more of an ongoing gag than a plot. You know, the two don't exactly have a great communicative rapport. Pretty much just there for a semi-emotional top-off for the finale, and that's it. It's not exactly a plot. Also, that in Minions 2, Gru is actually able to be a villain. That was another reason why it was so fun. I mean, guys, at this point, just abandon this timeline and dedicate yourself to the Minions Before universe. Which, yes, by the way, the Minions are also spoofing superheroes in this movie. Doesn't really matter, they're Minions, they're doing their Minion stuff. Almost completely disconnected from the rest of the story. As per usual, of course, I am neither particularly pleased nor disappointed in this. But yeah, that's easily where the gags were the funniest. But then again, as I've said, I am not a fan of this franchise, and if the girls just standing around for a collective 4 minute just being mildly cute is working for its target audience, what do I know? Because yeah, as expected, the movie did do good this weekend, of course it did. But remember, the very first weekend is a sign of hype, not necessarily quality. And this movie's hype was largely based off of the momentum of how much people liked the previous Despicable franchise. But this one has been getting very mediocre responses, meaning that the next Despicable movie is not going to do as well as this one. And also very likely that its second weekend is going to have maybe a slightly bigger drop-off than they're used to having. Like, it does show that the franchise still has steam, but it is definitely winding down, almost as if it needs a burst of fresh energy, maybe in the form of a time skip. Because Edith wanting to be a villain is genuinely an interesting character-based conflict of Gru struggling between wanting to be a good role model, while also wanting to bond with his daughter while indulging in his pastimes. It could really say something about parents who sometimes might deliberately pass down what they know are bad habits just for the sake of bonding with their child. But wait, that sounds too much like it's mildly challenging and interesting, and Dende knows Illumination can never be that. Fun only. And believe me, I get the monetary value of being a safe, family-friendly brand with all the competition and the floundering box office, but I can still be disappointed about it. And even if that doesn't work, the bigger reason why they should absolutely allow the girls to grow up is because if you should just say fast forward 10 to 12 years, then you can send them all to college and you don't have to deal with them in the plot anymore. Again, I would prefer you find a way to use these characters to be interesting than that, but if you literally just can't, that would be preferable to more of this. But you also have an easy way around that. Just have Gru teach the girls villain stuff so that they can be double agents like him. Then they have an excuse to do the villain stuff under the premise that he's still teaching them useful skills. After all, parents should encourage hobbies and practices that exercise creativity and various mental abilities. Which is why I'm glad to promote this video's sponsor, Brilliant. Brilliant is engaging interactive learning in multiple STEM fields like math, logic, scientific reasoning, programming to data analysis, and a lot more. For each of its lessons, Brilliant uses appealing graphics and animations and even game mechanics to make the lessons compelling and enjoyable. But what I particularly love about it, and sometimes what makes these subjects so difficult in traditional education, is providing real-world context and parallels and even case studies. To me, being able to really apply the knowledge is just as important as making it fun. And being able to get a glimpse of each of these subjects, even at the introductory level, already helps and makes so many bizarre and confusing aspects of life make a lot more sense, which helps when you explore subjects that increase your various ways of thinking. Even if I don't want to be a coder, it is certainly helpful as someone who uses computers to see the starting points of how computers think and operate. And it really is for everyone, whether you're someone who's starting from the beginning, whether you're someone who just enjoys a good brain teaser now and again to keep your mind sharp, or if you genuinely want to dip your toe into a new potential field of employment, but can only handle 15 minutes of learning a day. This site is incredibly user-friendly, meets you at your level, and picks up right where you left off each time. There really is just so much you can get out of Brilliant, and you can try it for free for 30 days by going to brilliant.org/sellspecs or by clicking the link in the description, where you will also get 20% off an annual subscription. Thanks again to Brilliant for sponsoring, and I hope that you all have fun learning.